Well, we all need a sense of routine and normalcy right now while the world around us is turned upside down. In the very small world that we live in right now, which has limited our mobility and our social exposure, we really need to feel connected beyond what we can just see and feel right now. Jesus is still Lord. The church is still the church. And the gospel is still the good news. And our mandate to make disciples of all the nations hasn't changed. So to keep our life as a church still in motion, we will still continue through our Lenten preaching series called 7 Words. These are the 7 statements, 7 prayers, cries, and longings that Jesus said from the cross. Thus far, we've looked at forgiveness, the first word, where Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And then the second word he said was the word of salvation to the thief beside him. "Today you will be with me in paradise." And last week we looked at the word of relationship. He said to Mary, "Behold your son," and to John, "Behold your mother." But this week, the 4th week, we get to the center of it all. Pray with me if you would. Jesus, in the emptiness of this room, we acknowledge that we still are the church. In the solitude of our own homes where we watch and listen, we are still the church. We ask for your mercy and your kindness to feed our soul as we open the word. Jesus, speak even today. Teach us of the faith. Amen. The 4th word comes from Matthew's Gospel and also Mark's, but I'll read Matthew 27, verses 45 through 47. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He is calling Elijah." Consider the scene. Darkness comes. From noon until 3 p.m., darkness covers the earth. Jesus, the light of the world, worked often in the dark. Consider, if you would, the stained glass that hangs just here on the chapel wall on my right, of Jesus calming the storm after walking on the water. He did this in the dark. He met with Nicodemus, the great teacher, in the dark at night. The Last Supper that we observe every week, which my heart desperately misses already, happened at night. Jesus had many all-night prayer sessions, especially the prayers from Gethsemane at night. And we're reminded his greatest work, rising from the dead, happened while the scriptures tell us, quote, "while it was still dark." In this darkness, Jesus cries out. It says he cries out in a loud voice. Literally, the Greek words, he megaphoned. He cried out. And what does he cry? He says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Will Willimon helps us appreciate the gravity of this word and the framework of the symphony of all the 7 words when he writes this. This is the word that sets all other words from the cross in context. This is the word that holds together all the rest. The word that uncovers the scandal of the words. And he's right. For this is the deepest words Jesus ever said, from the cross or otherwise. For in this statement, Jesus gives us the truest picture of the whole gospel story. A God who takes on all human sin and endures the consequences of cosmic brokenness on our behalf. You see, friends, Jesus not only dies, but worse, yes, worse than death, Jesus suffers alienation from God. And the alienation that Jesus endured is far worse than any of us have ever experienced. If there is a deepest mystery in Christian theology, to me, the dereliction of the Son from the Father is harder to comprehend than even the mystery of incarnation, the triune nature of God, or the problem of evil. This is not the first word of the seven, nor is it the last, and I'm very thankful for that. For if it was the first word spoken, we might run away from the story, and if it was the last word said, we would have no hope. But it's a beautiful word. Christian Wyman, the editor of Poetry magazine, wonderful American poet, was diagnosed recently with a rare and incurable form of blood cancer. Obviously, he has suffered, and he says of this word from Jesus, he says, I'm not a Christian because of the resurrection, although of course he is. He says, by testimony, and not because Christianity contains more truth than other religions, but it does. He says, I'm not a Christian because I was raised this way. He says by his testimony, I'm a Christian because of that moment on the cross when Jesus, drinking the very dregs of human bitterness, cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? The point is, he says that he felt human destitution to its absolute degree. The point is that God is with us, not beyond us, especially in our suffering. So does God seem distant to you right now? Please know that you're in the company of Jesus, who also felt that. Does it feel like your prayers go unanswered, that all they do is hit the ceiling and come back? You're in the company of Jesus. Does the weight of the world sit heavy on your shoulders today? You're in the company of Jesus. Does COVID-19 give you fear and anxiety and worry about the future? You're in good company. Jesus feels these things. Yet this statement is not just about the closeness of God to us through Jesus on the cross, who endured the pain of life and the separation of the Father. This word also teaches us about prayer. Interesting that Jesus is abandoned by God, and yet he prays. There's a deep irony here, isn't it? Why would you pray to a God you don't think or know is there? If God has abandoned, then there's no one to hear. All you're doing is just therapy. But Jesus has to exhibit faith. Jesus has to have faith. What? He has to trust in the unknown. So far, Jesus has not had to operate in any sense of separation from God. Sin had not marked him in any way. He lived an uninterrupted life, an enlightened life with the divine Godhead. But now he has to pray in a different way, a way like we need to pray sometimes. Jesus has to pray to God even when, especially when, God feels distant. The separation Jesus experienced in the final hours is unique to him, for God has not abandoned us. God is with us. God is always bringing us into the way of faithfulness by the Spirit. Now, we can resist that work of God, but even when we resist it, we are not outside the presence of God. God is with us. I love the American hymn I sang growing up. How firm a foundation, which the 6th stanza reads and sings like this: the soul that to Jesus hath fled for repose, I will not desert to its foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never forsake. Jesus was abandoned, but we are not. Can you appreciate the final words that Jesus gave to his disciples on the day he ascended, when he said to them, I'm with you always, to the very end of the age? The Jesus who felt abandoned when he leaves gives us the assurance that we will not be, because he was abandoned. Because of Jesus' abandonment, he is the last person who needs to say or feel utterly abandoned by God. You are not abandoned. because Jesus was abandoned. You are not separated from God because Jesus was separated from God. It's as though the new cry from the cross is not, my God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe it's the cry of the Father saying, my children, why have you forsaken me? Perhaps the most apropos association, as we now contemplate these words, is to connect them to a show tune written for a Jewish Yiddish theater company in 1896. The tune, my God, why have you forsaken me, Eli, Eli, became a devotional prayer, far outliving the play for which it was originally composed. In much the same way in which these words remind Christians of Jesus' pain and suffering, this song begins with the words of the psalmist from Psalm 22. But it also prompts Jews in their thoughts and remembrances of persecution and abandonment. In Nazi-occupied Poland, the singer most closely associated with this song, Eli, Eli, was a young woman named Miriam Eisenstadt. She was a beautiful young woman who was still in her teens, and whose radiant charm and extraordinary voice had won her an affectionate title, the Nightingale of the Warsaw Ghetto. Miriam evoked so much feeling when she sang this song that she even moved the stony hearts of the ghetto officials and the police. Her fame was so widespread that when Nazis came to film a documentary of the Jewish life there, she was compelled to sing her song, Eli, Eli. And in the final days, when the ghetto Jews were being rounded up and sent off into prison camps, Miriam was being pushed into a car, a train car, like cattle with her parents. And the car became too full that they couldn't stuff one more person, even her, into it, along with her parents. And she refused to be separated from them. And her plight to still force her way in, an impatient guard got upset, just shot and killed her right in front of her parents. At the age of 19, the Nightingale of Warsaw had sung her last, my God, why have you forsaken me? See, this story moves my heart. And it portrays many things: the brokenness of humanity, the innocence of youth, and the need for divine intervention. But really, it tells me again of the story of Jesus. And as much as Miriam's story moves me, Christ's story moves me. It moves me to faith. May it move you this way. You see, David originally prayed this prayer in Psalm 22. Jesus prayed it from the cross. And Miriam prayed this prayer several years ago. A final note. It says that in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out. We find out from a group of Jesus followers later in Acts chapter 3, just several weeks after this, they went to the temple to pray at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. Isn't it interesting? At the time set aside to pray is the time when Jesus prays this out. So may you have hope from Jesus today. Know that God has taken on all the brokenness of the sin of the world in Christ, who became sin for us, that we might know and have the righteousness of God. May you know that Jesus knows your sense of isolation. He knows what that's like to a far greater degree than we can. And may you know that the Spirit offers you communion right now with you that's not limited by our physical space, even though we cannot be together. God be with you, friends. Hear the words of Jesus, this fourth cry.